Back in 2019, I was a sophomore in college living in a cheap, off-campus basement apartment. I was going through a phase where I was obsessed with internet privacy and the unseen web. I had the whole setup, a premium VPN routed through Switzerland, and a Tor browser running on a bootable USB, and a thick piece of black electric tape firmly stuck over my laptop's webcam. I honestly thought I was a ghost online. Mostly the deep web is boring. It's 90% dead links, broken directories, and edgy teenagers pretending to be international arms dealers. I'd spend hours just clicking through link dumps, looking for something genuinely weird. Around 2:30 a.m. on a Tuesday, I hit a plain text directory hosted on the a.onion domain. The header just said, unsecured optics. Underneath was a massive, scrolling list of raw IP addresses. I recognized the format. It was a directory of unsecured IP cameras. Usually, these are traffic cams, factory floors, or baby monitors where people never bothered to change the default factory password. Morbid curiosity got the better of me, and I clicked a random link near the very bottom of the page. The browser hung for a moment before loading a grainy, low frame rate video player. There was no audio. The feed was completely black except for the sickly green tint of cheap infrared night vision. I leaned closer to my monitor, trying to make out the shapes. It looked like a bedroom. I could see the silhouette of a cheap desk, a precarious pile of laundry on the floor, and a bed shoved into a far corner. Someone was asleep in the bed, completely buried under a heavy, patterned comforter. I felt a sudden, sharp pang of guilt. This wasn't a traffic cam. I was looking into someone's private sanctuary while they slept. I moved my mouse up to close the tab, but my cursor froze when the person in the bed shifted. An arm slid out from under the heavy blanket and reached blindly for a phone resting on the nightstand. The phone screen lit up, casting a harsh, pale blue light across the person's face. My stomach dropped into a bottomless pit. The air in my lungs just vanished. The person on the screen, it was me. I was staring at a live, delayed feed of myself. My mind violently rejected what I was seeing, but I couldn't deny the details. The patterned comforter was mine. The pile of laundry was exactly where I left it. I was completely paralyzed. My eyes darted around the video feed, trying to figure out where the angle was coming from. It was high up, pointing down, coming from the dark corner of my ceiling, right above the doors of my closet. Slowly, terrifyingly, I lifted my actual head and looked away from my laptop screen, staring into the pitch black corner above my closet in real life. I couldn't see anything in the dark, no blinking red light, no lens reflection, nothing. But I knew it was there. When I forced my eyes back down on my laptop screen, my blood turned into ice water. A small, crude chat box had materialized in the bottom right corner of the web player. Above it, a counter read, "Viewers, 1." Then, a message appeared in the box. It said observer_99. This is what it said.
You have a really bad habit of leaving your closet unlocked.
Before I could even process the words, before I could even push my chair back from the desk, I heard it, coming from less than 10 feet away. A click. It was the distinct metallic sound of a doorknob turning from the inside of my closet. I didn't grab my phone, my keys, or my shoes. I threw myself backwards, my desk chair crashing onto the floor, and I bolted out of the front door of my apartment into the freezing night air in just my boxers and t-shirt. I sprinted down the street to an all-night gas station and begged the cashier to call 911. The police searched my apartment an hour later. They found a tiny, battery-powered pinhole camera drilled through the drywall above my closet frame. But worse than that, they found what was inside the closet. The ceiling access panel leading to the building's crawlspace had been pushed aside. Inside that dusty, cramped space, they found food wrappers, a few empty water bottles, and a filthy sleeping bag positioned right above my bedroom. Whoever it was had been living up there, watching me sleep. waiting for the right time to come down. They never caught him. I broke my lease the next day, and still physically cannot sleep in a room unless the closet door is wedged shut with a chair. Well, that's my experience with the deep web that made me not want to go back on. A few years ago, I was moderately active on the darknet marketplace that has long since been seized by the feds. I won't name it, but if you know, you know. I wasn't buying weapons or stolen identities. I just used it to buy small amounts of weed. It was cheaper, better quality, and honestly, felt safer than doing sketchy handoffs in grocery store parking lots. I prided myself on operational security. I used Tails OS, PGP encryption for all communications, and tumbled my cryptocurrency before making a purchase. Most importantly, I never used my real name or address. There was a foreclosed, rotting house 2 streets from my mom's place. I'd have the packages sent there under a fake name, track the shipment religiously, and just snatch the mail out of the rusted box the second the postal worker drove away. It worked flawlessly for over a year. I haven't logged into the market or placed an order in almost 2 months. I was just booting up Tails one afternoon to browse and see what was new. The second the market loaded, a notification pinged. I had a direct message from a vendor account I had never seen before. The username was just a random string of 12 digits. The message was chillingly brief, and it said,
I have a delivery that requires your immediate and specific attention.
Attached below the text was a standard USPS tracking number. My heart did a weird flutter, but I tried to rationalize it. Maybe a vendor I used previously got busted and the feds were phishing. Maybe it was a scam. I copied the tracking number, booted up a clean browser, and pasted it into this regular USPS website. The status bar was a bright green. It said out for delivery. But my eyes locked into the destination zip code. It wasn't the zip code for the foreclosed house 2 streets over. It was my actual real home zip code. The house where I lived with my mom and my teenage sister. At this point, pure suffocating panic set in. It was 1:45 p.m. The mail usually came between 2 o'clock and 3 o'clock. I paced a hole in my living room rug, peering through the blinds every 30 seconds. At 2:50 p.m., the familiar white mail truck hummed up to our curb. The carrier didn't just put the mail in the box. He walked up our driveway carrying a heavily taped, square cardboard box and dropped it heavily onto our front porch. I yanked the front door open before he was even back in his truck, grabbed the box, and practically sprinted to our detached garage. My hands were shaking so violently I could barely grip the box cutter. Inside the box, there were no vacuum-sealed bags or drugs. There were only 2 items resting on a bed of packing peanuts. The first was a cheap, black prepaid flip phone. The second was a single, glossy 8x10 photograph. I picked up the photo and my vision blurred for a second. It was a picture of my mother. She was standing in our kitchen, wearing her favorite blue bathrobe, pouring a cup of coffee. The true horror wasn't just the subject, it was the angle. The photo had been taken from the thick tree line in our backyard looking directly through the kitchen window. I looked at the bottom right corner of the glossy paper. The digital timestamp printed there was from 6:15 a.m. that exact morning. The second I dropped the photo, the burner phone in the box rang. It was the loudest, most jarring, obnoxious ringtone I've ever heard. It echoed in the quiet garage. I stared at it for 4 rings before my trembling hand reached out and flipped it open. I pressed it to my ear, but I didn't say a single word. A synthetic, digitized text-to-speech voice came through the terrible speaker. It didn't ask if I was there. It just started listing facts. It recited my full legal name. It recited my mother's maiden name. It recited the address of my high school my sister attended. the exact make and model of the car she drove, and the time she got out of marching band practice on Tuesdays. Then the robotic voice delivered its instructions. This is what it said.
Your security is an illusion. We need a clean address to receive a package that cannot risk interception. You will leave your back patio door unlocked on Tuesday night. The package will be placed inside your kitchen. Do not open it. Do not touch it. Do not look at it. Our associate will retrieve it on Thursday morning. If you attempt to involve law enforcement, the next photograph delivered to you will be taken from the inside of your sister's bedroom closet.
The line clicked dead. There was no hero moment. I didn't grab a baseball bat and stand guard. I walked back inside, told my mom I smelled a massive gas leak in the basement, and told her we needed to leave immediately. I grabbed my sister from school, and we drove 5 hours across the state lines to stay with my aunt. I called the local police for a suspicious person at my house, but I called them that Wednesday from a payphone. They dispatched a cruiser, checked the perimeter, and found nothing. We never went back to that house. My mom broke the lease, packed our things with police escorts a week later, and we moved to a different county. I still lie awake at night wondering what was supposed to be in that package. And I thank God I was too much of a coward to find out. If you dig deep enough into the obscure forums of the dark web, past the illegal marketplaces and the hacker boards, you eventually stumble across ARGs, alternate reality games. Usually there's just creepy, elaborate puzzles made by bored computer science majors involving cryptography, finding hidden text and audio files, and deciphering map coordinates. I was entirely obsessed with them. It felt like being a detective in a movie, uncovering secrets the rest of the world was blind to. I found a hidden forum that looked like a relic from 2005. It had no title, no banner, just a black background and a single thread. The only thing on it was a daily post from an admin containing a massive unbroken string of hexadecimal code. It took me 3 solid weeks of sleepless nights, neglecting my job and friends to crack the cipher. It was layered with AES encryption and required a specific cipher key hidden in the source code of the site. When I finally ran the decryption script, it sped out 2 lines of plain text, a set of precise GPS coordinates, and the time, 2:14 a.m. I mapped the coordinates. They pointed to a dilapidated, long-abandoned strip mall about 40 minutes outside my city limits, surrounded by nothing but dense woods and empty highways. My ARG brain took over. I convinced myself it was the physical drop for the next stage of the puzzle. A hidden USB drive taped under a bench, or a notebook hidden in the weeds. So, like an absolute idiot, I drove out there. I pulled into the cracked, weed-choked asphalt lot around 1:45 a.m. I parked my car behind a massive rusted commercial dumpster at the far end of the lot, turned off my headlights, and killed the engine. The silence out there was heavy and oppressive. The only light came from a single, dying street lamp, flickering out by the main road. I sat in the dark, my breath fogging up the windshield, waiting. Exactly 2:14 a.m., the gravel near the entrance crunched. A heavily rusted, unmarked white cargo van slowly rolled into the lot. It didn't have its headlights on. It had no license plates. It rolled to a silent stop about 50 feet from my hiding spot behind the dumpster. 2 men got out of the front doors. They were wearing dark clothes, their faces obscured by the shadows. They didn't exchange a single word. They walked around to the back of the van, threw open the heavy rear doors, and grabbed a hold of something inside. With a heavy grunt, they dragged a massive object wrapped in thick, dark tarp out into the pavement. The moment it hit the ground, the tarp started thrashing. It wasn't the frantic, jerky movements of a captured animal. The movements were too long, too desperate, too distinctly human. Though the thick canvas, I could hear muffled, agonizing grunts and the sound of someone hyperventilating against a gag. I stopped breathing entirely. I slid down in my driver's seat until my knees hit the steering column, praying to any God that would listen that the darkness and the dumpster were enough to hide my car. The two men bent down, grabbed the thrashing bundle by either end, and heaved it upward. They swung it over the lip of a second commercial dumpster near the van, letting it drop inside with a sickening hollow thud. They slammed the heavy plastic lid down, latched it, got back in the van, and drove away without ever turning their lights on. I sat perfectly still, paralyzed by a primal, suffocating terror. I couldn't move. For 10 agonizing minutes, I could hear a faint, rhythmic thumping coming from the inside of the dumpster across the lot, and then the thumping stopped. I sat there for almost an hour, too terrified to reach for my keys, convinced the van was waiting just out of sight. When I finally mustered up the courage to lift my trembling hand toward the ignition, my phone buzzed violently in my pocket. In the dead silence of the car, it sounded like a gunshot. It was an email notification. The sender was a string of random numbers, the exact same string of numbers that served as the admin's username on the ARG forum. My fingers were slick with sweat as I opened the email. There was no text in the body of this message, just a single attached image file. I tapped the image. It was a dash cam photograph taken using high-end night vision. The image was of my car, parked exactly where I was, behind the dumpster. The photo had clearly been taken from the dashboard of the white van while it was parked 50 feet away. If I zoomed in, I could see the faint outline of my own face peering over the steering wheel. The subject line of the email read, "Thanks for verifying the drop. Stay right there. We're turning around to get you." I didn't care about making noise anymore. I slammed the key into the ignition, threw the car in reverse, and I floored it. I hit the main road doing 80 miles an hour, running every red light until I hit the city limits. I drove straight into the parking lot of the main police precinct, ran inside, and babbled the whole story to the desk sergeant. When a heavily armed unit raided the strip mall dumpster an hour later, they didn't find the body. What they found was a heavy, dark tarp, sliced open and completely soaked in fresh blood. And zip-tied to the inside of the handle of the dumpster lid was a single laminated piece of paper with a message printed on it. You were supposed to help them. The summer of 1991 in Milwaukee was a hot one for me. I was 20 at the time, working a dead-end job, washing dishes, and constantly on the lookout for a way to make a few extra bucks. It was a Tuesday night, I think, and I was heading home from my shift, walking the same route I always did. Near the bus stop on Wisconsin Avenue, this guy stepped out from the shadows of a storefront. He was unassuming, kind of shy, with those big 80s glasses. "Excuse me," he said. His voice was soft. "Sorry to bother you, but my name is Jeff." I stopped, weary like anyone else would be, but he didn't seem threatening. He just seemed awkward. He explained that he was a photographer and was looking for a model for a project. He said he likes my build. He offered me $50 to come back to his apartment for a couple of hours, have a few beers, and let him take some pictures. $50 was a fortune to me then. It was more than half a day's pay for getting greasy in the kitchen. I hesitated. My mom's voice was in my head, warning me about strangers, but he seemed so normal, harmless even. I looked him over again, and he wasn't big or imposing, just he looked like a regular guy. What kind of pictures? I asked. Nothing weird, he said quickly, almost tripping over his words. Just some poses, artistic stuff. I'll pay you as soon as we get there. Against my better judgment, I said yes. The $50 was too tempting. We walked a few blocks to Oxford Apartments. The lobby was drab and smelled like old cigarettes. As we walked up the stairs, he kept up a stream of nervous small talk about his job at a chocolate factory. When he unlocked the door to his apartment, 213, the smell hit me like a physical blow. It was indescribable, honestly. A chemical, rotting stench that clawed at the back of my throat. It was like spoiled meat and cleaning products all mixed together. Sorry about the smell, he mumbled, not looking at me. My fridge it's on the fritz. I've got to clean it out. The apartment was barely furnished. A beat-up couch, a TV on the stand, and a bare mattress on the floor. But what I couldn't take my eyes off was a large blue plastic barrel standing in the corner of the room. It just seemed out of place. Have a seat, he said, gesturing to the couch. He went to the fridge and pulled out a couple of beers. He opened one and handed it to me, then opened his own. Let's just relax for a minute before we start. I took a sip. It tasted fine, but as I sat there, the awful smell started to get to me, and a cold, creeping dread began to pool in my stomach. He was just staring at me, with a strange, vacant look in his eyes. The friendly awkwardness was gone, replaced by something else, something cold. I have another drink. I think you'll like it better, he said suddenly, standing up. He went over to a small cabinet and pulled out a glass and a bottle of liquor. My heart started to pound. He poured a generous amount, and then, for a split second, his back was to me as he fumbled with something in his pocket before turning around. He held the glass out to me. Here, try this. I looked at the drink, then at his face. The friendly mask was completely gone. All I saw was an empty, predatory hunger. Every alarm bell in my head was screaming. The smell, the barrel, the locked door, the new drink that he made. I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone that if I drank that, I would not be leaving his apartment. You know what? I said, my voice shaking as I tried to keep it steady. I'm not feeling so good. That smell, I think I'm going to be sick. His face tightened. Just one drink. It'll make you feel better. No, man, I really gotta go. I stood up, my body trembling. I'm sorry, I'll just go. For a moment, he just stood there, blocking my path to the door. It felt like an eternity. I could see the struggle in his eyes, a flash of pure, violent anger. I thought he was going to lunge at me, so I braced myself, my mind racing for an escape, an object to use as a weapon, something. Then as quickly as it came, the anger vanished. His face went blank again. He sighed, a sound of really deep disappointment. Fine, he said as his voice just went flat. Just go. He stepped aside. I didn't wait for him to change his mind. I practically flew out that door, and I fumbled with the 3 locks that he had on it, and I burst into the hallway. I didn't look back. I ran down the stairs out of that building, and I didn't stop running for 6 blocks. A few weeks later, the news broke. They showed his picture, the apartment building, the blue barrel, everything. They talked about the drills, the acid, and the body parts in the fridge. I sat on my couch watching it on my little TV, and I went completely cold. I saw the face of the man who offered me a drink. I had been in that room. I had smelled that death. I don't know why he let me go. Maybe I wasn't his type. Maybe he didn't want to deal with the struggle that night. I never know. But I do know that I was $50 away from being another one of his secrets. I don't walk alone at night anymore. That was the night that Jeffrey Dahmer almost got me. It's funny sometimes what you can remember. It's not always the big cinematic moments. Sometimes it's just the little things. The way the rain sounded on the tin roof of the bus stop. A constant shh, like it was just telling you to keep your secrets. That's what 1983 felt like around SeaTac. A big, wet, gray secret. I was 19 at the time. My life was a cycle of cheap coffee, sore feet, and the smell of bacon grease that clung to my hair. Every night I drive home in my Pinto, a car the color of the rust and regret, and I think about the girls. The ones on the news, the Green River girls. They felt like distant cousins of a sort. Girls who worked late, girls who were trying to get by, girls like me. My Pinto died on a Tuesday, of course. It was a Tuesday. It died on the stretch of a road that was pitch black, sandwiched between the whispering woods and the distant roar of the highway. My hazards were blinking. I sat there, hands gripping the wheel, and I felt the kind of cold that had nothing to do with the temperature. It was the cold of absolute vulnerability. Every car that passed was a monster until it was gone. I was afraid. After what felt like an eternity, a beat-up pickup truck slowed down. I remember the make. It was a Ford, maybe. It was dark and covered in a layer of grime that Pacific Northwest cars just wear. The man inside rolled down the window. He looked like nothing. A mustache that looked like it was trying to escape his face, glasses, and a flannel shirt. He had the tired, blank look of every guy who came into the diner for a cup of coffee and a piece of pie. "Car trouble?" he asked. His voice was higher than I expected, kind of reedy. The relief was so powerful it made me want to cry. "Yeah, she's dead," I said, trying to laugh it off. "Well, you can't stay here," he said, and it sounded like simple, obvious kindness. "Hop in. I can take you somewhere." My mom's voice was a faint whisper in the back of my head, but the fear of the dark road was a roar. The choice was between a definite, creeping terror and a potential unknown one. I chose the unknown. I grabbed my purse and I ran through the rain, the drops feeling like icy needles. The cab of his truck was a mess. Not a scary mess, a normal person's mess. Fast food bags, a crumpled road map, some tools on the floor. It smelled like stale Winstons and that weird sweet smell of old coffee spilled on the floor mat. He introduced himself as Gary. He was kind of chatty, honestly. He told me he painted trucks at Kenworth and complained about his shifts. It was also disarmingly normal. But then the vibe shifted. It was subtle. He started asking me questions, where I worked, where I lived. But his eyes, they would linger. He had this weirdly intense, unblinking stare. Like he wasn't just hearing my words, he was consuming them. "A pretty thing like you shouldn't be out so late," he said. And the way he said "pretty thing," it made my skin crawl. It wasn't a compliment. It felt like he was classifying a specimen. My whole body went on alert. I was still making small talk, but it was all automatic. Inside my brain was a frantic hamster on a wheel. Did I lock the door? Can I open it while the truck is moving? What's that on the floor? I saw a coil of rope near my feet, and my breath hitched. He missed my turn. I knew it the second that we passed the 7-Eleven. "My apartment was back there," I said, my voice tight. "Oh, I know a shortcut," he said smoothly. And he didn't even look at me. He just stared ahead into the darkness, and that's when I knew. You don't take a shortcut to a place you don't know. He turned down a gravel road and the world just disappeared. The trees crowded in, their wet branches scraping against the sides of the truck. It was like driving into a tunnel of black. My heart was a wild bird trapped in my ribs. He started talking about the Bible, his reedy voice quoting verses about sinners and whores. This was it. I was going to be one of those girls on the news, my picture, my name, another ghost haunting the Green River. I didn't have a plan, it was just pure animal instinct. Going to be sick, I gasped, clutching my stomach. It's the chili I ate. Please, I'm going to puke all over your truck. He got angry. I saw it in his face. The meek, bland mask dropped. And for a second, I saw something utterly monstrous. Just hold on, he snapped. I can't, I wailed. And I let out a gagging sound that I didn't even have to fake. The thought of what was about to happen was making me sick. The threat of vomit on his upholstery was more real to him than any terror. He slammed on his brakes. The truck hadn't even fully stopped when I threw the door open and launched myself out. I didn't care about my purse, my keys, nothing. I hit the muddy ground and just ran, scrambling up the embankment, thorns and twigs riding at my clothes. I heard him yelling, a string of furious, ugly words, but I didn't even look back. I ran until my lungs felt like they were on fire, until I burst out of the woods and onto the pavement again. I flagged down a car, a family in the station wagon who looked at me like they'd seen a ghost. Maybe they had. Years later, when they finally caught him, I saw his face on TV. Gary Ridgway. It wasn't a jolt. It was like a piece of ice sliding down my spine. The world went silent. It was him. The face of nothingness. The man who painted trucks. The man who knew a shortcut. I sank onto my couch and I just shook. It wasn't a headline. I was the story that didn't get written. The one who got away. And I still don't know why to this day. It wasn't a cold, rainy night. It was the opposite, which somehow made it worse. It was one of those suffocatingly hot Florida nights in the late 80s, the kind where the air is so thick with humidity, you feel like you're breathing water. I was 20 years old and my world had just imploded. A screaming match with my mom and stepdad had ended with me packing a duffel bag and storming out, vowing never to come back. My grand plan was to take a Greyhound to my cousin's place in Atlanta. Of course, grand plans made in a fit of rage rarely work out. I got to the bus station in Tampa just in time to see the tail lights of the 11:30 bus pulling away. The next one wasn't until 6 a.m. So there I was. Yeah, that sounds cliche, I get it, but so there I was, sitting on a hard plastic bench under the buzzing fluorescent lights, broke, heartbroken, and trying my best not to look as scared and as alone as I felt. The station was mostly empty, just a few other lost souls scattered around. A man sat down on a bench across from me. He wasn't scary at first. He was big, yes, a large black man with powerful shoulders, probably in his late 40s. He had a friendly, gap-toothed smile, and there was a gold cap on one of his front teeth that glinted when he spoke. He looked like somebody's uncle. "Hey, you missed your bus, little sister?" he asked, his voice a low and gravelly rumble. I just nodded, wiping at my sweaty forehead with the back of my hand. "Happens to the best of us," he said, chuckling. "Where you headed?" "Atlanta," I mumbled. He clicked his tongue. "That's a long wait, a real long wait to be sitting in a place like this. Not safe for a young lady." He leaned forward, resting his big arms on his knees. "Tell you what, I'm driving up toward that way to see my brother. It's on the way. I can take you that far, get you to the station up there, but it'll be a lot closer than here." I should have said no. Every warning I'd ever heard screamed at me to say no. But I was tired and miserable, and the thought of just sitting in that depressing station for 7 more hours was unbearable. In his smile, it seemed so genuine. He looked harmless, like a big friendly bear. I don't have any money for gas, I said. He waved a big hand dismissively. Don't you worry about that. I ain't looking for money. Just helping a sister out. So I did it. I followed him out to the parking lot to his car. It was a big, beat-up American sedan, maybe a Lincoln. A dirty yellow color under the parking lot lights. The inside smelled like old cigarette smoke, something sweet like cheap air freshener. He was a talker, a big talker. As we got onto the interstate, he told me stories. He said he'd been a boxer, an ambulance driver, all sorts of things. He was charismatic, and I found myself relaxing, even laughing a little bit. He seemed to know just what to say to put me at ease. But about an hour into the drive, the tone changed. His questions got more personal. He asked if I had a boyfriend, if I was a good girl. His eyes kept flicking over to me, and the friendly uncle vibes was replaced by something else, something appraising and cold, something dark. You got pretty eyes, he said, his voice losing its friendly rumble, and a nice neck, long and slender. A jolt of pure ice went through me. It wasn't a compliment. The way he said it, it was like a butcher admiring a cut of meat. I shifted uncomfortably, my back pressed against the passenger door. We need to get some gas, he announced suddenly, and he pulled off the highway onto a dark, deserted exit. There was no gas station in sight, just a 2-lane road flanked by dense, dark swampland. The chorus of frogs and insects was deafening. Where's the gas station? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He just smiled, the gold tooth flashing. There's one up here a ways. Cheaper gas off the highway. He drove for another mile down the dark road, then slowed the car to a crawl. The friendly mask was gone. His face was hard, his eyes flat and dead. He reached over with one of his huge hands and laid it on my thigh. It felt as heavy as a cinder block. You and me, we're gonna have some fun, he murmured, his voice low and guttural. My entire body went rigid. I wasn't a person to him anymore. I was a thing. I looked at his hand on my leg, then at his face, and I saw a bottomless pit of violence there. This wasn't about a ride. This was about something else. This was about him owning my last breath. My hand, shaking uncontrollably, found the door handle. I didn't think, I just acted. I yanked the handle and I shoved the door open with all my might. I tumbled out of the slow-moving car and hit the gravel shoulder hard, scraping my hands and my knees. I scrambled to my feet and ran to the darkness of the trees and to the swamp. I could hear him slam on its brakes, the car skidding. I heard him yell, "Get back here." I just kept running, blindly, branches whipping my face. I plunged into knee-deep, murky water, not caring about the snakes or gators or anything else. The only monster I was running from was him. I hid behind a huge cypress tree, submerged in foul-smelling water, trying to control my ragged, panicked breathing. I saw his silhouette. His silhouette was against his car headlights as he got out and he stood on the road, looking into the darkness where I disappeared. This dude was a giant, terrifying shape. He yelled for me again then, after a moment that felt like a lifetime. He let out a string of curses, got back in his car, and peeled out down the road. I stayed in that water for over an hour, shaking, until I was sure he was gone. Years later, I saw his face on the news. Samuel Little. The drawings he made of his victims, the way he described their last moments. And I saw my own face in my mind's eye. The girl with the pretty eyes and the long, slender neck. The girl who almost ended up as just another one of his charcoal sketches. That was the scariest night of my life. only dated Nikki for about 6 weeks. We met on a dating app, and at first, she seemed great, funny, attentive, maybe a little clingy, but I brushed it off. By the 3rd week, she was showing up at my apartment unannounced. By week 5, she was talking about breaking her lease to move in with me. I panicked and I ended it. She didn't yell or scream, she just stared at me with a completely blank, dead expression, nodded, and left. I thought I got off easy. A month went by. Things in my apartment started feeling off. I'd come home from work and noticed my toothbrush was damp. The milk in the fridge would be significantly lower than I remembered. I lived alone on the top floor of an older duplex, so I initially blamed my landlord, thinking he was coming in to snoop. To catch him, I bought a cheap motion-activated camera on Amazon and hid it on top of my kitchen cabinets, angled toward the front door in the living room. I checked the app the next day while at work. There were 3 notifications from the middle of the night. I clicked the first video. The timestamp said 2:14 a.m. The footage was in that eerie green night vision. The front door didn't open. Instead, the camera caught movement from the ceiling in the hallway. The square wooden hatch leading to the crawl space above my apartment slowly pushed upward. A pair of bare legs dangled down, dropping silently onto the carpet. It was Nikki. She was wearing one of my old college t-shirts that had gone missing weeks ago. My blood ran completely cold. I clicked the next video. 3:30 a.m. Nikki was standing in the kitchen, eating leftovers directly out of my fridge. But it was the final video. Timestamped 4:45 a.m. That made me physically throw up. It showed her walking out of my bedroom. She wasn't carrying food, she was carrying my chef's knife. She walked calmly back to the hallway, pulled the chair over, climbed up, and pulled the attic hatch shut behind her. She hadn't broken in. She had never left. I called the police from my office. When they searched the crawl space, they found a nest made of my stolen clothes, dozens of food wrappers, and a peephole that she had drilled directly through the ceiling drywall, looking straight down into my bed. The police ended up catching her, and she tried calling me from jail, but I never answered. This was a few years ago. Everyone told me that my relationship with Chloe was like a movie. We met when we literally bumped into each other at a used bookstore. She dropped her bag, and when I helped her pick up her things, I saw she was holding a copy of a sci-fi novel by a super obscure author I love. We started talking, and it turned out we liked the same indie bands, had the same weird food allergies, and even vacationed in the same obscure beach town as kids. It felt like destiny. We moved in together after 8 months. She was perfect, almost to the point of being a little too accommodating. One Saturday, she went to a yoga class and left her laptop open on the kitchen island. I wasn't the snooping type, but I needed to check my email and my phone was dead. I opened a new tab, but my eyes caught a minimized Excel spreadsheet on her desktop titled Timeline. Curiosity got the better of me, so I clicked it. It wasn't a work document. It was a ledger of my entire life for the past 3 years. There were columns for my daily schedule, my gym times, and my usual coffee shop orders. But it got worse. There was a tab labeled Interferences. I clicked it and read a list of actions she had taken before we ever met. This is what it said. June 14th. Slashed tire on his girlfriend Sarah's car. She'd missed their anniversary dinner. August 2nd. Created fake Tinder profile using Sarah's photo. Sent screenshot to his brother. November 10th. Got him fired from the downtown cafe by calling in 3 fake health code violations. He needs a job closer to my apartment. She had orchestrated the breakup with my previous girlfriend. She had sabotaged my job. I kept scrolling, my hands violently shaking. The last tab was labeled Acquisition. It detailed exactly how she found out what book I was looking for at the bookstore, and how she waited in the aisles for 4 hours until I walked in so she could bump into me. I heard the front door unlock. Chloe walked in holding a yoga mat, smiling brightly. "Hey babe," she said. I looked from the screen to her. Her smile slowly faded. Her eyes darted to the laptop, and her face went completely flat. The sweet, bubbly girl I had known for 8 months vanished within a second. She calmly locked the deadbolt behind her, slid the security chain into place, and reached into her gym bag. "I really didn't want you to see that until we were married," she whispered. I didn't wait to see what she was pulling out of that bag. I threw a bar stool through the sliding glass patio door, jumped off the second-story balcony into the bushes, and I ran. It's obvious I broke up with her that day. She tried calling me, but I blocked her. She tried getting to me through my family, but no one is letting her know where I'm at. Ever since that day, I haven't seen my ex-girlfriend. I hate talking about this, but I had to get a restraining order against my ex, Jessica. When I broke up with her, she didn't just get mad. She became terrifyingly vindictive. She keyed my car, showed up at my workplace screaming, and eventually threw a brick through my living room window. After the court order, I decided to break my lease and move to a small, isolated cabin rental about an hour outside of the city just to get some peace of mind. I didn't tell anyone the address except my parents. For the first 2 weeks, it was heaven, total silence. Then small things started happening. I'd wake up and my back door would be unlocked. I convinced myself I just forgot to lock it. Then I found a cigarette butt on the back porch, and I don't smoke. I told myself it was just paranoia, the leftover trauma from dealing with Jessica. One night, a massive thunderstorm rolled in. The rain was deafening against the tin roof. I decided to take a hot shower to calm my nerves before bed. The bathroom in the cabin was tiny, just a toilet, a sink, and a fiberglass shower stall with a thick opaque plastic curtain. I locked the bathroom door, stripped down, and I got in the shower. I stood under the hot water for maybe 15 minutes, just letting the stress wash off me. The bathroom filled with thick steam. I turned off the water, pulled back the shower curtain, and grabbed my towel. I wiped the condensation off the mirror above the sink to look at my face. Written in the fog on the mirror, backward, so I could read it in the reflection, were the words, "You look good." My heart slammed against my ribs so hard it hurt. I spun around. The bathroom was empty. I lunged for the door handle to get out. It was locked, but not the way I had left it. The push-button lock on the handle had been popped, and the heavy deadbolt at the top of the door, which I hadn't touched, was slid firmly into place. Someone had locked the door from the inside while I was in the shower. I backed up against the door, my eyes darting around the tiny room. There was nowhere to hide. The only place I hadn't looked was back inside the shower. I stared at the opaque plastic curtain I had just pulled shut. The bathroom light was behind it, casting a faint shadow against the plastic. It was the silhouette of a person. She had been standing at the very back of the shower stall, pressed flat against the fiberglass wall behind the inner liner. The entire time I was watching myself, just inches away from her. As I stared, paralyzed from absolute terror, the shadow slowly raised an arm, and a cold, wet hand gripped the edge of the shower curtain. "Did you really think you would just leave me?" Jessica's voice whispered from behind the plastic. I unlocked the deadbolt and I bolted naked into the living room, grabbing my car keys and running out into the freezing rain. I was flapping everywhere like a helicopter. The police arrested her about an hour later. She was sitting on my bed, holding a box cutter, waiting for me to come back. I'm glad I broke up with her, because who knows what would have happened if we would have got deeper into our relationship. I drive a hot-shot trucking rig, mostly running between Dallas and San Antonio. Because of the weird hours, I usually stop at the Temple Buc-ee's around 2 or 3 in the morning. It's well lit, safe, and they have that massive grassy area on the perimeter for people to walk their dogs. I had my pit bull mix, Buster. He was with me on this run. It was a Tuesday night in late October. The lot was mostly dead, just a couple of 18-wheelers, idling way out in back, parked near the far edge of the lot. Grabbed Buster's leash and I walked him toward the dog relief area. If you've been to this location, you know the grassy slopes down toward the thick line of oak trees and heavy brush. It's pitch black past the edge of the manicured lawn. Buster usually pulls like crazy to go sniff the trees. But that night, about 10 feet away from the tree line, he slammed the brakes. The hair on his back stood straight up. And he let out this low, vibrating growl that I had never heard from him before. I pulled the leash. "Come on, buddy. Do your business." He wouldn't budge. He was staring dead into the absolute blackness between 2 large oak trees. I squinted, trying to see if it was a raccoon or coyote. Then, there was this voice that came out of the dark. "Is he friendly?" It didn't sound right. The voice was totally flat, no inflection, no emotion, just a weirdly mechanical drone. And it sounded like it came from right at the edge of the grass, maybe 5 feet in front of us, though I couldn't see anyone. Yeah? He's just skittish in the dark," I called out, slowly wrapping the leash around my hand to shorten it. "Is he friendly?" The voice repeated, exactly the same pitch, exactly the same pacing. It was like a recording. I took a step back. We're leaving." That's when a face leaned out from behind the trunk of the oak tree. The security lights from the parking lot just barely caught it. It was a man, but his face was completely coated in what looked like thick, wet mud. Or blood. It was dark red and shining in the light. He was blinking. He stepped completely out from behind the tree. He was holding something heavy and metallic in his hand. It looked like a rusted tire iron. Buster started frantically snapping his jaws. The man didn't flinch. Instead, he dropped a hard squat, keeping his eyes locked on me. And then he let out a perfectly replicated imitation of Buster's low growl. It was impossibly loud for a human throat. I didn't think. I just turned and sprinted, dragging Buster with me across the wet grass. I heard heavy boots thudding against the dirt right behind us, closing the distance fast. I got to the truck, threw open the door, shoved the dog inside, and I bolted into the driver's seat. I slammed the lock just as something smashed into the side of the passenger door. I floored it out of the lot. When I checked my mirror, the man was standing right under the bright lights of Pump 12. He was just standing there, staring at my departing rig, tapping the tire iron against his own forehead. When I checked my truck the next morning at the rest stop, there was a massive, deep dent in the passenger door, right where my head would have been if the glass had shattered. Honestly, I've never been back to Buc-ee's. This story is something that happened to me. So the Buc-ee's in Katy, Texas is famous for having the longest car wash in the world. It's over 250 feet of enclosed automated tunnel. I used to think it was a fun little novelty. Not anymore. It was mid-afternoon on a Sunday, but the sky was pitch black from a massive Gulf Coast thunderstorm. The rain was coming down in sheets, so I figured I'd kill 2 birds with 1 stone. Wait out the worst of the storm and get the highway grime off my Honda Civic. I paid, pulled onto the conveyor truck, and put the car in neutral, and let the track pull in. The heavy plastic flaps closed behind me, shutting out the daylight. It's loud in there. The massive brush is spinning, the water jets screaming against the metal. About halfway through the tunnel, deep in the middle of the heavy colored soap cycle, the conveyor belt abruptly lurched and ground to a halt. A second later, the power cut out. The brushes stopped spinning. The water stopped spraying. The heavy industrial lights overhead shut off. It went from a deafening noise to absolute dead silence. I was sitting in the near total darkness, surrounded by thick foam on my windows, listening to the rain hammer against the metal roof of the building. I figured it was a power outage from the storm. Pulled out my phone and texted my wife, but I had zero signal inside the metal tunnel. That's when I heard the splashing. It sounded like heavy boots sloshing through the ankle-deep water on the concrete floor. There was a splash, then a pause, and another splash. Someone was walking down the narrow walkway next to the conveyor track. I rolled down my window about an inch to see if it was an employee checking the cars. And I asked, "Hey, are we stuck?" The splashing stopped immediately. I waited. Nothing. I said, "Hello?" Suddenly, something slammed violently against my driver door. I physically jumped in my seat. Then came a slow, wet dragging sound against the glass of my window. Someone was wiping the thick soap away. In the dim emergency lighting that had flickered on, a face appeared in the cleared circle of the glass. It was a guy in a soaking wet generic gray hoodie. The hood pulled up tight. His eyes were bloodshot and wide, and he was grinning. But he wasn't looking at me. He was staring intensely at the back seat of my car. I froze. I slowly looked in my rearview mirror, terrified something was back there. It was empty. When I looked back at the window, the man raised his hand. He was also holding a large, jagged piece of broken cinder block. He pulled his arm back and smashed my window. I threw my car into drive and slammed on the gas. The tires screeched against the metal track, burning rubber, before finally catching. I literally drove my car off the automated track, smashing through the massive rolling brushes and bursting through the exit doors of the tunnel. I pulled off to the side of the building, my heart beating so hard it hurt. I ran inside to find the manager. We went to the security office and pulled the exterior cameras. We watched my car enter the car wash, but nobody had walked in behind me. Nobody walked in from the exit. Whatever or whoever was in that tunnel with me had been waiting inside the car wash in the dark before I even got there. Hell no, I've never been back to Buc-ee's. What I know about Buc-ee's is that it's famous for being incredibly busy, which makes it easy to feel anonymous in a crowd. You never think you could be isolated in a store with 300 people in it. I was driving back to college in San Marcos after visiting my parents in Dallas. I stopped at the new Braunfels location, the massive one, around 11:30 p.m. I grabbed a basket and I went over to the enormous jerky counter in the center of the store. There was a decent crowd around it, people pointing at different meats, and workers shuffling behind the glass. I was standing there deciding between teriyaki and peppered when I felt it. You know, that instinctual feeling of being stared at. The hair on the back of my neck prickled. I glanced up. On the other side of the circular counter, standing perfectly still while people bustled past him, was a guy who looked to be in his late 30s. He was wearing a stained yellow windbreaker and a dirty baseball cap pulled low. His eyes were locked dead on me. He wasn't blinking at all. I looked away, feeling instantly uncomfortable. I grabbed a bag of jerky and walked toward the home goods section, the area with the cast iron pans and rustic signs. It's usually quieter over there. I stopped to look at a t-shirt. I caught movement in my peripheral vision. The guy in the yellow jacket was standing at the end of the aisle, just standing there, hands deep in his pockets, staring at me. Panic started to bubble in my chest. I deliberately turned and walked briskly toward the massive wall of fountain drinks. I grabbed a cup and I filled it, trying to act casual. When I turned to put the lid on it, he was standing right behind me, maybe 2 feet away. He was so close I could smell him. Stale sweating, something metallic like copper. Excuse me, I mumbled, trying to step around him. As I brushed past, he leaned in right next to my ear. His voice was dry and raspy whisper. Texas plate LKV 4092. Silver Toyota. My stomach dropped. That was my exact license plate number. He had been watching me in the parking lot before I even came inside. I didn't walk. I basically jogged toward the front registers, scanning frantically for a police officer or a manager. The store was huge, and suddenly the crowd felt like an obstacle course. I looked over my shoulder. He was following me, matching my pace, easily weaving through the families and tourists. He pulled his right hand out of his pocket. I couldn't see what he was holding. The handle was black plastic, and the blade caught the overhead fluorescent lights. I abandoned my basket and I sprinted. I ran straight behind the cash register counters, completely ignoring the startled employees, and bolted through a heavy metal door marked employees only. I found myself in a long, brightly lit concrete hallway lined with boxes of inventory. The heavy door slammed shut behind me, cutting off all noise of the store. It was dead silent. A second later, the metal door handle slowly clicked open. I dove behind a massive pallet of bottled water, just as the heavy door swung wide. I held my breath, pressing my hands over my mouth. I heard his boots slowly stepping onto the concrete. Tap, tap, tap. LKV 4092. He whispered, his voice echoing slightly in the back hallway. He was walking down the aisle of boxes, getting closer to my pallet. I looked around for anything to use a weapon, but I only had my car keys. I gripped them so hard my knuckles went white, and I'm black as hell. Suddenly, a loud buzzer went off at the far end of the hall, and a massive loading dock door began to roll up. A forklift drove in, driven by a guy in a high-vis vest. "Hey, you can't be back here," the worker yelled. I peeked around the corner of the water cases. The guy in the yellow jacket stared at the forklift driver for a second, then calmly turned around and walked back through the door into the main store. I ran out to the forklift driver, practically hyperventilating, and told him everything. They called the police, who arrived and escorted me to my car. We scoured the parking lot and the store, but the guy was completely gone. I never drive at night anymore, and if I do have to stop for gas, I never, ever get out the car.
From the devil's house, take me. It is time, Lord, from the dry dust out of these chains, from the devil's house. It is time, Lord, take me from the dry dust, break me.
If you've never been to New Orleans, you might not know what a shotgun house is. It's a long, narrow house where every room connects directly to the next without a hallway. To get to the bathroom from one living room, you usually have to walk straight through the bedrooms. A few years ago, two of my friends and I rented half a cheap double shotgun house in the Bywater neighborhood for a long weekend. The place was incredibly old, crooked floors, peeling paint, the window units struggling against the sweltering Louisiana humidity. I took the middle bedroom, which meant my friends had to walk through my room to get to the kitchen or the front door. We didn't care. It was cheap. On our second night, we got back from Frenchman Street around 3 a.m. We were all exhausted, so we locked the front door, turned off the lights, and immediately crashed. The window AC unit in my room was broken, so it was dead silent and suffocatingly hot. Around 4:30 a.m. I woke up. You know that instinctual feeling when someone is looking at you? I felt that, heavy in my chest. I opened my eyes, but the room was pitch black. Then I heard it. Wet, heavy breathing. It wasn't coming from my friends' rooms. It was right at the foot of my bed. I froze. I thought maybe one of my friends was messing with me or sleepwalking. "Hey, I whispered. The breathing stopped immediately. A suffocating silence filled the room. Then I heard the unmistakable sound of bare feet shuffling on the hardwood floor, moving away from my bed and toward the closet. The closet didn't have a door, just a dingy curtain hanging over the frame. I heard the curtain ring scrape against the metal rod. I grabbed my phone from the nightstand and I hit the flashlight. Standing half concealed behind the curtain was a man. He wasn't one of my friends. He was gaunt, filthy, and holding one of the largest kitchen knives from my own counter. He wasn't looking at the light. He was staring directly where my head had just been on the pillow. I screamed louder than I ever had in my life, and I scrambled backward against the wall. The man didn't flinch. He just smiled, this massive, hollow grin, and slowly backed into the pitch-black closet. My friend burst into my room a second later, turning on the overhead lights. I was hyperventilating, pointing at the closet. When he pulled the curtain back, it was empty. But at the top of the closet ceiling, an old attic access panel had been pushed aside, revealing a black square of empty space. We ran out of that front door and called NOPD. When the police searched the crawl space, they found a makeshift bed, food wrappers from the groceries we had bought, and several Polaroids. The pictures were of us, sleeping in our beds the night before. He had been up there the entire time, just watching us. I do freelance photography, and last November I got hired for a late afternoon wedding shoot at an old plantation out in the bayou, about 40 minutes outside of New Orleans proper. By the time I packed up my gear, it was nearing midnight. If you drive out of the city toward the east, you end up on Chef Mentir Highway. It's a desolate 2-lane stretch of road surrounded by deep, black swamp water and tall reeds. There are no streetlights, and the fog rolling off the water that night was so thick I could barely see 10 feet past my hood. I was driving about 40 miles per hour while knuckling the steering wheel when I saw something lying across my lane. It looked like a large, dark log. I swerved into the oncoming lane to avoid it. But as my headlights hit the object, I realized it wasn't a log. It was a person, lying flat on their stomach in the middle of the highway. My heart dropped into my stomach. I slammed onto the brakes, my car skidding on the damp pavement before coming to a complete stop about 50 feet ahead of the body. I threw the car in park. My immediate instinct was to get out and help, but something felt wrong. The person had moved an inch, despite the screeching tires. I grabbed my phone to call 911, but I had absolutely zero cell service out in the swamp. I looked in my rearview mirror. The red glow of the tall lights barely pierced the fog. The body was still lying there. Suddenly, the body stood up. It didn't stagger or stumble like someone who was hurt. It stood up perfectly straight, in one fluid motion, and turned to face my car. Before I could even process what was happening, 2 sets of headlights flicked on in the woods on either side of the road. 2 pickup trucks pulled out from the hidden, overgrown side trails, completely blocking the road behind me. This was a trap. I threw my car into drive and I slammed the gas pedal to the floor as I sped past the person who had been lying on the ground. They lunged at my car and swung something heavy, a crowbar or pipe, smashing my passenger side window into a million pieces. Glass rained all over me, but I didn't stop. I drove at about 80 miles per hour, entirely blind through the fog, terrified that I was going to careen into the swamp. I looked in my rearview mirror and I saw the headlights of the 2 trucks pursuing me. They were gaining fast. I didn't let off the gas until I finally saw the glow of a 24-hour gas station on the outskirts of the city. I pulled in, honking my horn frantically, until the attendant came outside. The trucks never passed by. When the police investigated the next day, they told me it's a known tactic used by carjackers and kidnappers in the rural parishes. If I had actually gotten out of my car to check on that body, I wouldn't be here writing this story. New Orleans City Park is massive. It's actually larger than Central Park in New York. During the day, it's beautiful, filled with ancient oak trees draped in Spanish moss. But at night, the massive canopy blocks out the moonlight, and certain unlit paths become pitch black. I used to live in an apartment right across from that park. One evening in late October, I took my dog, a heavyset boxer mix named Duke, for a walk. I usually stuck to the lit perimeters, but Duke caught the scent of something and pulled me down one of the dirt trails that cuts through a dense grove of oaks. We were maybe a quarter mile deep into the trees when Duke stopped dead in his tracks. His hackles raised, and he let out a low, vibrating growl. Duke loved everyone, so this immediately put me on edge. I looked down the path ahead of us. Standing about 50 yards away, completely still, was a very, very tall man. He was wearing a dark, oversized trench coat and a wide-brimmed hat. In New Orleans, you see eccentric people all the time, but it was his posture that was terrifying. He was standing with his arms bent at unnatural sharp angles like a praying mantis. "Hey," I called out, trying to sound confident. "Just passing through." He didn't respond. He didn't even shift his weight. I decided I wasn't going to risk it. I tightened my grip on Duke's leash, and I turned around to walk back the way that we came. After a few steps, I heard a soft crunch of leaves behind me. I stopped. The crunching stopped. I walked a little faster. The footsteps behind me sped up, matching my pace perfectly. Panic started to set in. I looked over my shoulder. The man was much closer now, maybe 30 yards away. But he wasn't walking normally. He was taking massive, exaggerated strides, almost gliding over the dirt silently, his arms still locked in a bizarre, jagged position. I broke into a run. Duke didn't need to be told twice. He was pulling me forward with everything he had. The heavy thudding footsteps behind us erupted into a dead sprint. The man wasn't even trying to hide it anymore. He was chasing us, and he was terrifyingly fast. I could hear the fabric of his heavy coat whipping in the wind, and the strange, wet, clicking noise coming from his mouth, like someone snapping their tongue against the roof of their mouth over and over. I reached the edge of the park where the street lights illuminated the sidewalk. I burst out of the tree line, practically diving onto the pavement, and I spun around. The man had stopped right at the boundary of the shadows. The light caught the lower half of his face. He wasn't looking at me. He was staring directly at my dog, smiling so wide it looked like his jaw was unhinged. He slowly raised one of his hands, pointing a long, pale finger at Duke, and whispered something that I couldn't hear. Then he turned and went back into the darkness of the trees. I called animal control and the police, but they never found anyone matching that description. I moved out of that apartment 2 months later, and to this day, whenever I walk my dog at night, if he stops and stares into the dark, I don't look to see what he's looking at. I just run. This happened back in 2017, during my junior year of high school. The last day of the school year was always a half day. We would get out around 11:30 a.m., effectively cutting us loose right before lunch. Both of my parents worked full-time in the city, which was an hour commute. So it was given that I would be home alone until at least 5:30 p.m. I was perfectly fine with that. I was 17 and the idea of having a house to myself to kick off the summer was exactly what I wanted. I lived in a relatively quiet suburban neighborhood. The houses were spaced out just enough to give everyone privacy, mostly separated by tall fences and thick lines of pine trees. After getting off the bus, I walked the 3 blocks to my house. The neighborhood was dead silent. Most people were at work, and the younger kids were still in elementary school, which didn't dismiss until 3 p.m. I unlocked the front door, threw my backpack onto the kitchen counter, and immediately grabbed a soda from the fridge. I headed down to the finished basement to play some video games, looking forward to hours of uninterrupted peace. I had my gaming headset on, but I kept one ear off just in case the home phone rang. About an hour into playing, I heard a distinct, heavy thud coming from the floor above me. At first, I brushed it off. Old houses, they settle, and the AC unit occasionally made a racket. But a few minutes later, I heard the undeniable squeak of the hardwood floor in the living room. Someone was walking around upstairs. My blood ran cold. I paused my game and I sat frozen in front of my chair, listening. The footsteps were slow, deliberate and heavy. They didn't sound like my mom's heels or my dad's dress shoes. They sounded like heavy work boots. I slowly stood up, my heart hammering against my ribs, and crept towards the basement stairs. From the bottom of the staircase, I could look up and see a sliver of the hallway. Suddenly, the footsteps moved toward the kitchen. I heard the unmistakable sound of my backpack being unzipped. Whoever was up there was going through my things. Panic set in. I didn't have my cell phone on me. I had left it on the kitchen counter right next to my bag. My only option was the old landline phone attached to the wall in the basement storage room. I moved as silently as humanly possible, terrified that the stairs would creak if I tried to climb them. I reached the storage room, picked up the receiver, and prayed for the dial tone. It was there. I dialed 911 with shaking fingers. I whispered to the operator someone was in my house, and I was hiding in the basement. She told me patrol cars were on the way and instructed me to stay exactly where I was. While on the line, I heard the basement door at the top of the stairs slowly creak open. I stopped breathing. The operator was speaking into my ear, but I couldn't respond. I heard the heavy boots descend the first 2 steps. Then a voice, a deep, raspy, unfamiliar voice called out into the dark basement. "I know you're down there, kid. Your school ID is on the counter." Tears immediately welled up in my eyes. I backed myself into the darkest corner of the storage room, gripping a heavy metal flashlight I found on a shelf. The footsteps came down 2 more stairs. Then, the blare of police sirens shattered the silence of the neighborhood. The sirens were close, and they were approaching fast. The intruder stopped. I heard him scramble back upstairs, followed by the sound of the back patio door sliding violently open and slamming. It slammed shut. By the time the police cleared the house, the man was gone. He had hopped the back fence and disappeared into the wooded area behind our subdivision. They found pry marks on the back door and my cell phone smashed in the kitchen floor. To this day, they never caught him. I never spent another day home alone after that. When I graduated high school in 2014, my friend group had a tradition. Every year, the graduating seniors would go out to a massive clearing in the woods about 10 miles outside of town to have a massive bonfire. It was an open secret. The cops usually knew about it, but would turn a blind eye as long as nobody drove recklessly or caused property damage. The plan was for everyone to meet up in the clearing around 8 p.m. I had just gotten a new used car as a graduation present, so I volunteered to drive out there early, around 6:30 p.m., to help a few older guys from our friend group set up the firewood and clear out the brush. I drove out of the town limits, taking the winding dirt roads deep into the rural part of our county. The sun was getting low, casting long, eerie shadows through the dense canopy of trees. When I finally pulled into the dirt clearing, I was entirely alone. There was no other cars. I parked, kept the engine running, and checked my phone. I had no cell service, literally 0 bars. I figured my friends were just running late. I turned off the engine, rolled the windows down slightly to let the evening breeze in, and put on some music. 10 minutes had passed, then 20. The sun was dipping below the tree line now, and the woods were rapidly transitioning from a warm summer evening to a dark, isolating environment. That's when I heard the crunch of dry leaves coming from the tree line about 50 yards to my left. I turned down the radio and I squinted into the fading light. First I thought it was a deer, but as my eyes adjusted, I realized I was looking at a person. It was a tall, incredibly thin man standing just behind the first row of trees. He was moving. He wasn't walking past the clearing. He was just standing perfectly still, with his body angled directly toward my car. A deep sense of dread washed over me. I rolled up my windows immediately. "Hey," I yelled out, my voice muffled by the glass. "You guys here?" The man didn't respond. Instead, he took one slow step out from behind the trees. Even in the dim light, I could tell something was profoundly wrong. He was wearing filthy, tattered clothes, and he held something long and metallic in his right hand. It looked like the length of a rust pipe. My instinct told me to start the car. I reached for the ignition, but my hands were shaking so badly that I fumbled the keys, dropping them into the passenger side floorboard. So I cursed, unbuckled my seat, and I leaned over to grab them. As I sat back, I looked out the driver's side window. The man was no longer 50 yards away. He was sprinting across the dirt clearing, closing the distance at a terrifying speed, raising the metal pipe above his head. I jammed the key into the ignition, twisted it, and I threw the car into reverse. Just as the tires gripped the dirt and the car lurched backwards, the metal pipe smashed into the hood of my car with a deafening clang. I slammed the brakes, shifted into drive, and I floored it. The man swung the pipe again, shattering my driver's side mirror into pieces as I sped past him. I didn't look back in the rearview mirror until I was about 3 miles down the road. It was a dirt road, my heart practically beating out of my chest. When I finally got back into town and I hit cell service, my phone blew up the notifications. The bonfire had been relocated at the last minute because the local police had barricaded the dirt road leading into the woods earlier that afternoon. My friends had been trying to text me for an hour to tell me the new location. I don't know who that man in the woods was, or how long he had been waiting out there. I dread to think what would have happened if I had stepped out of my car to wait for my friends. I work as a high school biology teacher in a very old, sprawling brick building that was constructed in the 1950s. The layout is a maze of long corridors, detached wings, and heavy fire doors. 2 years ago, on the last day of school year, the students were dismissed at noon. Faculty had the rest of the afternoon to finalize grades, pack up their classrooms, and officially sign out for the summer. By 4:30 p.m., the building was practically a ghost town. Almost all of the teachers had left. The administrative staff had locked up the front office, and the only people remaining were the night shift janitorial staff, who were actually mostly clustered in the cafeteria wing on the other side of the campus. I was alone on the second floor of the science wing, trying to pack up some fragile lab equipment. Around 5 p.m., I realized I needed to use the restroom before I boxed up the last few microscopes. The staff bathroom on my floor was being renovated, so I had to use the main student restroom at the far end of the hallway. The silence in the empty high school was oppressive. Every footstep echoes loudly against the lockers and tile floors. I walked down the dim corridor, the motion sensor lights clicking on lazily as I passed under them. I pushed open the heavy wooden door of the girls' restroom and went into the handicapped stall at the very back, which offered the most space. As I was washing my hands at the sink a few minutes later, I heard the heavy wooden door to the restroom slowly creak open. I assumed it was one of the female janitors coming to empty the trash. Just give me 1 second. I'm almost out of your way, I called out over the sound of the running water. Nobody answered. The door closed with a soft click. The heavy dead silence returned. I turned off the faucet and I dried my hands, feeling a sudden prickle of unease. I looked down at the gap beneath the bathroom stalls. Standing just inside the doorway, barely visible in the reflection of the floor tiles, was a pair of large, scuffed work boots. They were entirely motionless. Hello? I asked, my voice trembling slightly. The boots took a step forward. The sound was heavy and wet, like the soles were caked in mud. They didn't walk toward the sinks or the trash cans. They walked directly toward the stall I had just exited. I slowly backed away from the sinks, pressing my back against the tiled wall, trying to stay out of the direct line of sight from the door. I watched in absolute horror as the boots stopped in front of the empty handicap stall. Then, the person slowly pushed the stall door open. When they saw the stall was empty, the boots pivoted, turning toward the sinks where I was standing. I didn't wait to see a face. Pure adrenaline just took over. I bolted toward the exit, lunging for the heavy wooden door. As I grabbed the handle, I caught a split-second glimpse of a man in a dark, oversized hooded sweatshirt, standing near the stalls. His face was entirely obscured by the hood, but he lunged forward the moment I moved. I ripped the door open, threw myself into the hallway, and I let the door slam shut behind me. I didn't stop running until I reached the faculty parking lot. I locked myself in my car, and I immediately called the school resource officer, who was off duty but lived nearby. He arrived with the local police department 10 minutes later, and they swept the building. They found the science wing completely empty. However, when they reviewed the security cameras near the side exits, they found no footage. About 20 minutes before I went into the bathroom, an unidentified man had propped open a side exterior door with a rock while the janitors were distracted. The camera footage showed him wandering the empty hallways, checking door handles, until he saw me walk out of my classroom and followed me into the restroom. They never identified that man from the footage. Every time I stay late to grade papers now, I make sure the door to my classroom is deadbolted from the inside. Sooner or later, I may buy a weapon.
Nightmare Files.